When you see a Khorne berserker, your mind immediately goes to the World Eaters, but that's not necessarily true in the 41st millennia. It's kind of true that that's where they come from, but usually the World Eaters aren't actually the World Eaters. Every once in a while when Angron can be bothered to do something, he'll kind of rustle the Legion back together, but for the most part, it's a bunch of desperate warbands, all just fighting in the name of Khorne. And speaking of fighting, there is nothing Khornate berserkers love more than a good war, and there is a very interesting sub-faction of Khornate berserkers, and that is the Bloodgorged. This is a group of Chaos Space Marines who make it their mission to go out and kill other Chaos Space Marines. They find it the greatest sin of all to worship Slaanesh, Nurgle, or Tzeentch, and so they make it their duty to go out into the galaxy and kill those Chaos Space Marines who worship the lesser gods, and then offer their skulls up to the one and only Khorne, god of murder and war. Khorne berserkers don't always have to be World Eaters red. Sometimes, like the Bloodgorged, they can be orange. Or any other color, I suppose. Although there probably should be a little bit of red. I love the lore of the Bloodgorged, and I found this picture online of a classic Khorne berserker. This was back when Chaos Space Marines were really messed up and transformed, and I want to bring a little bit of this back onto my modern berserkers. I started off by chiseling away his shoulder pads. This was a used model, and the previous owner used some good glue to stick them together, and eventually I got these shoulders off and I snipped off his chain axe arm too. He's a favorite of Khorne, so he should have a little mutation. I drilled out his wrist in preparation for some tendrils. These might be his undersuit transfigured into a new limb, or maybe it's his butcher's nails that have traveled all the way down his arm into his chain axe. To make this limb, I nipped off his hand, cleaned up the handle, and then I took some guitar wire and used some needle pliers to make it round. Then I took some scale barbed wire and wrapped this around the first wire and the axe. I wanted to look like a tight bundle of cords. Khorne cords. I found some copper wire in a few different gauges and wrapped this around there too. Then I tucked this all into his wrist, dripping some super glue in it to lock it down. Now I have this creepy chaotic limb. I want to try to give him some fancy shoulder pads like in the photo of the old school model. I started by mixing up way too much green stuff. I got a little carried away. I made a little snake and draped this over his shoulder, and then I used a rubber chisel brush to push and prod it into place. Then I took my hobby knife and trimmed it up a little bit. Then I pressed in the collar section, leaving it tall, and then squished down the rest of the goo covering his shoulder. My knife did the squishing, and I used a round chisel brush to flatten and smooth it. I then used my knife to cut off the excess, trimming it up and making it match the photo. And I kept poking and prodding at it to try and get it as smooth as possible, running over the surface and then running over the edge and doing this again and again. Now that I have one side done, I switched to the other side, doing all the same steps. I'm not the most experienced green stuff sculptor, but every little project helps. I used some Vaseline on my tools to help them not stick and glide over the putty, and I just kept working at it until eventually it was good enough. It was definitely something. I did my best on the shoulder pads, and for the most part they turned out. They're not quite like the photo that I was looking at, but they're something. The hardest part was getting them to be the same, and they're pretty close to symmetrical now. The left shoulder is a little bit bigger than the right shoulder, and it looks like it's bigger, I think because that shoulder is up a little bit higher, but overall, I'm pretty satisfied with this. They don't really look like the picture, but they look a lot like Angron's shoulder pads, and so I feel like that's very fitting. Now that I've fitted this guy with shoulder pads, it's time to fit him with a base. Now to get this fella on a base, I need to cut him off the old base, and the old glue was way too strong, so I had to cut and sand away the old base. For the new base, I started by putting down a layer of cork, using ultra thin super glue to stick it down. I tore away the extra cork and then added a second little platform for him to stand on. Then I went and grabbed some skulls from the Citadel skull sprue, and it's very fitting that a Khorne base would have plenty of skulls, and once these were glued down, I used some texture paste to blend these in and hide the smoothness of the cork. With the leftover spots, I used the pointy end of my hobby knife to chisel away a little bit more cork, and my boy was ready. Khorne berserkers are available to vanilla Chaos Space Marine armies, but they definitely have some stiff competition in the close combat Space Marine department. Legionaries are pretty darn cheap and throw a similar number of dice in close combat, and Warp Talons are really good at getting exactly where they need to be and then throwing their punches. But in a World Eaters army, Khorne berserkers are pretty good, and their surge move is excellent. In your opponent's shooting phase, if they decide to shoot at the Khorne berserkers and kill one, then the Khorne berserkers can then try to make a move into close combat with something, which is very powerful. Although typically what ends up happening is your opponent just decides not to shoot at the Khorne berserkers, which is really annoying because sometimes they're right in your face and you just have to let them be there, because if you shoot at them and you do at all well, that means that you're just gonna be fighting them. The World Eaters like to be fighting, and another very interesting, very fighty unit is the Hellbrute. The Hellbrute is the Chaos Dreadnought. It can have a power fist, a power hammer, or like a scourgy whippy thing, and either the hammer or the fist is really, really good, But the most important thing is its special rule, Frenzy. Every time the Hellbrute gets punched, it gets to punch back. Often this will give you a double punch because it's just the order of combat. You punch, they punch, and then you get to punch again. But this can get ridiculous when you're consolidating into other units. I recently had a game with my Necrons where they learned this the hard way. I had 3 lines of Necrons, I had Warriors, Immortals, and then a squad of Heavy Destroyers, and the Hellbrute comes in, and it wipes the Warriors, and then consolidates into the Immortals, and then the Immortals, they have to punch back, because that's the rules, and then they punch back, and then the Hellbrute wipes them, and then consolidates into the Heavy Destroyers, and then it wipes the Heavy Destroyers. Oh, that one hurt. The Bloodgorgeds like to fight chaos, and I actually think that would make for some really good games because units are usually pretty good at killing themselves, and a chaos on chaos mirror match would be incredibly violent. To get some color on this guy, I started off with a black prime. Then I sprayed some white ink from above, and I gave this model a satin varnish to protect the fragile ink layer from the heavy washes I want to do next. And that first wash will be the base coat. I want a nice orangey armor, and I mixed in some yellow to try and keep the orange from getting too dark. I want to stay away from red. I painted this mix onto his head, body, arms, and thighs, and for the rest of him, I base coated these with some red paint. Then I gave him a wash of dusk red, a very dark red speed paint. I did a little bit of sponging of red over the dark red wash to make these parts look nice and beat up. And I did a little bit of highlighting with a light red mix I made by mixing warm white into red. I'm not going to be picking out all the trim on this guy, so I'm using this highlight to hit some of those sections. Now to sink a little time into those shoulder pads. I painted white stripes running down the face of the shoulders, doing a few coats to get full coverage. And I also put this color over his crazy ears. I put this color on the trim of his face and body as well as the base coat for some more speed paint. Broadsword Silver. This gives a nice silver finish in one coat with a little bit of contrast. I also put this over his axe, tentacle hand, and the wings of his shoulder pad. I did a little dry brushing of silver over his metal, and then it was back to his shoulders. I sponged some red over the stripes to make them look chipped and weathered, and then I took a nice sharp brush and did some micro scratches. This battle damage is in preparation for some decals. I grabbed the old school Chaos decal sheet, and grabbed the Khorne symbol and a little Chaos star, and I gave these a soak on my wet palette sponge. I slid these into position and then crushed them down with a wad of damp paper towel. Once that was dry, I varnished over these transfers to make them match the satin finish of the rest of the paint job, and I sponged on some tan, and I did some more scratches with the brush to make it look just as beat up. I still have plenty of room on the shoulder pads, so I decided to make some tally marks. I took some tan paint and very carefully painted on some tallies, adding as many as would fit in these spots. I don't know what he's keeping track of, maybe it's every filthy chaos worshipper who doesn't worship Khorne. And if that's true, this little guy has really gotten around. He's dropped almost 3 full squads of Marines by himself. And you know what else kills a lot of Marines? That's right, our website. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find merch like our EOB dice, wet palettes, waterslide decals, and basing toppers and bits. It's also the best way to support us with memberships. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly train packs or any previous pack we have ever made. This month, we have the Faraway Galaxy Bundle, a battlefield's worth of sci-fi buildings with a clever removable door and roof system for easy access. These buildings print easy and are perfect for cutting a battlefield into a dangerous urban maze. There's also plenty of cargo containers and barricades, including the XT6 cargo sled for moving all of these accessories around the war zone. This set is perfect for quickly setting up a thematic battlefield in any system, planet, or moon. This set will be on EonsOfBattle.com for the month of July, and then it'll be gone. With the shoulders done, I finished off his bare arms with some tan and then hit the gloves with some black contrast paint and some gray highlights. I put a wash over his skin and then got to work picking out his eyes. I started by flooding these sockets with some white paint and then a wash of a bright green. Once that was dry, I reapplied the white highlights on his lenses and the Marine is done. Time for that base. The Zenithal was looking pretty good and I added some more texture to the cork with the sponging. Then I did some highlights on the skulls and then I went and grabbed a dark brown enamel. I thinned it down with some mineral spirits and then glazed this over the base and I threw it over the rest of the Marine as well, to panel line some of his details and make him a little grimmer and a little darker. I carefully highlighted the skulls' faces with some tan, really hitting their temples and cheeks, and then I wanted to try something. I want to make some gore and I've had this idea of using some cotton to make it. I tore off some fluff from a cotton swab and cut some lengths of thread and I put these into a cup with some blood paint. This made something that looked pretty nasty, but I had a hard time getting it to stick to his chainsword, so I mixed in some Elmer's glue which did help it stick. I managed to get a little something going on the teeth of the chain axe and I left that alone to dry while hitting the rim of the base with some black. The Bloodgorged, the orange world eaters. You don't see a lot of orange. What else is orange? Like Leagues of Votann? I feel like you see red so often with the world eaters that anytime you see any other color, it makes them a little bit more interesting. I also love the idea of Chaos Space Marines who hate and fight other Chaos Space Marines. It makes perfect sense in the lore, and you can never do it with the Imperium. With the Imperium, if they were fighting against one another, one of them is Renegade. I guess the Kakaradons live in this weird middle ground where they are Renegade, but they're still loyal to the Imperium. But for Chaos Space Marines, there's no rules. These guys just want to punch Tzeentch in the face. I think if I was building a World Eaters army, I would definitely go the Renegade Raiders route, where I don't have Angron, I don't have Khorne the Betrayer, but instead I have like a winged demon prince named Chucky, and he's the guy leading my ragtag force of just weird looking Khorne dudes. With my Black Templar, I really like everything to have a basis in lore and being able to trace it all back to like the Codex and the novels, but I feel like Chaos Space Marines are kind of like the Orcs. I just want to do whatever I want. And whatever I want kind of works because of how crazy these guys are. The Khorne Berserker kit is a lot of fun to mess with, and I think if I was doing a Chaos Space Marine army, which I'm not, but I might, I would definitely be tempted to get a box of these guys just for the bits. I mean, it comes with chain axes. Who doesn't want chain axes? Let me know in the comments below what Chaos Space Marine, Legion, or Warband should I take a look at next, and as always, thanks for watching.